Hola, bienvenidos a todos. El First Center del Tecnológico de Monterrey y el Center for Inclusive Growth de Mastercard les da la cordial bienvenida a este interesante webinar titulado ¿Por qué los microempresarios no utilizan los pagos digitales? Un tema de gran relevancia y mucho interés para los esfuerzos que realizamos en promover la inclusión financiera y la salud financiera de nuestra sociedad, particularmente de las personas más vulnerables y excluidas del sistema financiero. Además, que es una iniciativa que está muy alineada con la iniciativa de Mastercard Tech for Good, que principalmente a raíz de esta pandemia de COVID está trabajando con sus socios estratégicos para promover un uso más extendido de las plataformas digitales en beneficio de la sociedad mexicana en particular. Y sin más preámbulo, le doy la bienvenida a Timothy Ogden para que nos pueda presentar a los panelistas de esta ocasión e iniciar con la introducción de este interesante webinar. Bienvenidos y muchas gracias.
Gracias, Felipe. Buenos días a todos. Me llamo Timothy Ogden. Soy el director del Financial Access Initiative, un centro de investigación en New York University, donde enfocamos en la inclusión financiera. Pero vamos a continuar en inglés con traducción. Y entonces, déjame introducir a Shreya Kankanhali, who is soon to be a PhD graduate, a doctor from Stanford's Graduate School of Business, and who has been studying the adoption of digital technologies by small-scale merchants around the world for several years. And Paulo Ise, who is a co-founder of Kiwi, which is a digital platform for micro merchants, enabling them to adopt financial services and digital financial services in Mexico. So today we're going to be talking about a particular project that Shreya has been studying along with Kiwi in adoption of digital payments in Mexico. And this is a really important topic as we think about what the next frontiers of financial inclusion are. So there's been a lot of excitement around mobile money and digital financial services around the world, driven by some really remarkable successes. But those successes haven't expanded quite in the same way. So, we've had, perhaps to put it in academic terms, a reversion to the mean after some huge success in adoption in Kenya, with M-Pesa, with bKash in Bangladesh, and in a few other countries. But in many other places, the adoption of DFS has been much slower for a lot of reasons. And there are questions about what can we do to accelerate the usage of digital financial services? What are the steps that we take? There's an argument that says you start with consumers, and if consumers start using DFS, then the merchants will follow. There's another approach that says, consumers are not going to adopt until there's a place to use DFS. So you've got to get the merchants adopting first, and then that will drive consumer usage. And then, of course, we've got a long history of research in development economics, illustrating how hard it often is to get people to adopt technology, whether it's digital technology or any technology. We spent 40 years trying to figure out how to help farmers adopt improved practices, from fertilizer to improved seeds. And so it's no surprise that even where there are benefits to DFS, that it's not just an automatic thing that people will just adopt. And we need to better understand what the particular barriers are, and the barriers for consumers, for merchants, and barriers that are related to each geography, so that interventions reach the people who are least likely to adopt, but perhaps most in need of using some of these technologies. Whenever we talk about digital financial services, I think of a phrase that I borrow from Greg Chen at CGAP is, digital can be a bridge to bring people into the system, but it can also be a moat. And that we have to especially pay attention that in digital transitions, we are not leaving the people who are already excluded even further behind because of some of the additional challenges that unfamiliarity with digital technologies can bring. So that's one of the reasons I think this particular work that Shreya has been doing is particularly interesting. Looking at micro merchants in Mexico, not a group of people who we would think would be early adopters of technology, and understanding, what are the barriers and what are the issues that may impede their adoption, and what kind of interventions might accelerate those. So with that, Shreya, let me turn it over to you. Could you tell us some about the work that you've been doing?
Great, I would love to do that. And thank you very much for the introduction, Tim. Let me just set up my slide sharing with you all, as I have a number of slides to present on this work. Well, thank you very much for the organizers of this webinar, including MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, Tec de Monterrey, and the Financial Access Initiative at NYU. So we're very excited to be sharing this research with a broader audience. And before I get started, I'd like to mention my co-authors on this project, Professor Sridhar Narayanan from Stanford's Business School, Professor Stephen Anderson at the University of Texas, and Dr. Leonardo Iacobone from the World Bank. So in this work, we focus on payment technology adoption by small-scale retailers in Mexico. And what we do is we seek to understand barriers, interventions, and consequences of adopting digital payment technologies. So in this work, we're grappling with a puzzle on the low rates of digital payment usage and high rates of cash usage in Mexico's retail sector. And the headline statistic here is that around 85% of retail transactions in Mexico happen in cash. This is kind of puzzling because in the past, if you wanted to accept electronic payments in your business, there was a substantial investment you would have to make in setting up the infrastructure to do so. But over the last few decades, financial service providers, including companies like Kiwi, have substantially innovated to make the technology requirements a lot leaner and simpler. All you need now is a smartphone with network connection and Bluetooth enabled, and then a device to accept e-payments, which could cost somewhere up to $50. For the average retail merchant in our sample who makes around $500 a month in profits, this is a pretty small investment. Yet adoption and usage of e-payments remain so low. So our research team designed a project to understand why. And in the process, we realized that the barriers can actually be quite complex. For instance, in our sample of cash-only businesses, there was a surprising level of digital capabilities in other arenas. So in this chart, I plot the percentage of firms in our sample who use various types of digital technologies. And the red bar is going to denote firms who had above median profits, and the green bar is going to indicate firms who had below median profits. And you see that for both segments, around 80% of firms are connected to the internet and use it for their business. Around 50% of firms use digital marketing in some way, and that can be broadly defined. It can include things like sending WhatsApp messages to customers. So the takeaway here is that these merchants are not necessarily digitally illiterate, yet electronic payments seem to be a big obstacle in their overall digital journey. And so in order to uncover this puzzle, we designed an experiment, a field experiment, where we offer traditional cash-only merchants different interventions in order to overcome barriers to adopting electronic payments. And we've collaborated with Kiwi and their co-founder, Pablo Ize, in this project. And in the subsequent few slides, I'm going to outline the various interventions in detail and tell you precisely what barriers they intend to overcome. So in our first intervention, we try to overcome technology barriers that are unique and specific to electronic payments. So I already showed you that the merchants in our sample have some digital capabilities. And we therefore intuited that the merchants actually may just lack specific knowledge or financial resources to acquire the device, set it up, and learn how to use it. So we make that easy for them in this intervention and cover all the upfront costs and technology setup of that. What we do in this intervention is we provide a technology kit consisting of a smartphone, a data plan for 12 months, a Bluetooth Kiwi dongle that can accept payment options, and we install the Kiwi software on their on the smartphone that we provide. We also give them 2 visits from an IT consultant who is essentially a trained business undergraduate student. And the IT consultant walks them through the full end-to-end process of setting up the technology in their business, and then teaches them over a couple of hours on how to make and process transactions. So just the basic functioning of the software and app. Our second intervention addresses the fact that encouraging e-payment adoption is a two-sided problem. Tim alluded to this in his introduction. If customers don't want to pay electronically, merchants have little incentive to adopt the technology. And similarly, if merchants don't adopt card readers or means of accepting electronic payments, customers may have no incentive to adopt digital payment methods themselves. So we provide an intervention here to break this potential vicious cycle that could play out and help the merchant market e-payments actively to customers. So first, they indicate that they accept these card payments with various marketing materials that are provided by us. And there are lots of little intricate features in the design here that we needed to get exactly right. For example, if you look at setting up this poster here on this slide, it actually ended up the case that a lot of firms did not want to put the poster up unless it was the exact right size. And so we needed to figure out how to make it large enough that it's visible, but not large enough that merchants simply wouldn't put this up. We also provided them with a totem outside their store, and we had to really design this carefully so that it wouldn't be stolen and it wouldn't blow over when there was a gust of wind on the street. So it seems like there are a lot of little details that really matter for whether these sorts of marketing tools get adopted. Additionally, in this intervention, we provide the business with 8 visits where marketing consultants, who again are these trained business undergraduate students, help the merchant market the payment option to customers. So they give a pitch to customers at the point of sale, encouraging them to use other non-cash options and tell them why those options might be better. We also help them devise strategies such as including a little discount for paying through non-cash options, or offer them a little gift for paying through non-cash options. And finally, in our third intervention, we address the barrier that transaction fees might play. So for those of you that are unfamiliar, when a merchant accepts a card payment from a customer, there's a 3 to 5% transaction fee that they must pay to the payment solution provider. And we wanted to test if this transaction fee looms large in the minds of merchants and inhibits them from adopting. And there's a lot of mixed qualitative evidence here. Our hunch was that it might not. So when we were doing field work in the streets of Guadalajara, Mexico, with these merchants, many of those who had adopted the technology already barely thought about this transaction fees. And many could not even report what the actual rate that they paid was. However, it could be the case that for those merchants that are far behind in their adoption journey, this is something that actually looms large. So we wanted to test if this matters still. What we do in this intervention is we offer a waiver of the transaction fee that is going to apply for 4 months, which we deem to be a sufficient period of time for the merchant to get used to and acclimated with using electronic payments in their business. And so our experiment is now at over the halfway stage, and we wanted to share some preliminary insights from this research. So the first insight to share is that technology installation is not as straightforward as it might seem. In the previous slide, I sort of described it as just giving the merchants a set of technology and giving them 2 visits, and it gets set up. But actually, in practice, small usage challenges can completely derail the adoption process for firms. For example, in older age groups, we see a lot of demand for merchants to be coached through the entire process, as any kind of future technology challenge that comes up, they seem to be unable to easily deal with it. So one funny anecdote here is that there was a pop-up message on the Kiwi app that came up for one of our older business owners, and they were completely unaware of how to use the app any longer, simply because there was a pop-up message present, and our intervention team had to assist them just to kind of inform them how to remove the pop-up message from the screen. And this happened 2 months after we intervened with the business, and had we not kind of further told them what to do in that scenario, they might have stopped using this completely. Additionally, we do seem to see that this that adopting this technology has a positive impact on revenue and profits in these firms. And our early kind of associations in our data suggest that e-payment adoption is associated with a 9% increase in sales revenue. Thirdly, consumer education, as we do in our marketing intervention, seems very important. And this teaches us that merchants can serve as ambassadors for the technology to consumers. So firms with the marketing intervention, in addition to the technology intervention, appear to process 27% more pesos in transactions using e-payments than firms with the technology intervention only. And we think that this is happening because they're really able to convince consumers to start using this alternative method. However, the final insight that I would like to end this presentation with is that even when a firm receives all three interventions to overcome technology barriers, marketing barriers, and financial transaction barriers, and has responded well to these interventions, we see that usage remains hovering around 20%. And a big question now is why can't we push it much further than 1/5 of the total transaction amount happening in electronic payments? And that's the avenue for further work of our research team. Thank you very much for listening, and yeah, I look forward to the further discussion with Pablo and Tim.
Thank you, Shreya. The findings around usage, I want to make sure that I understand. And from your final slide, that the 20% adoption is a percentage of their total transactions for adopters. Are there people that you do all of this with and don't seem to be accepting any transactions at all?
There are indeed. Yeah, there are.
And so what percentage of the people that you're treating with one of the three are essentially outright rejectors?
Okay, so in terms of rejectors of adoption, we're seeing basically that in every intervention batch, around 10% want kind of nothing to do with. They want nothing to do with it. Another kind of sizable portion, and this is, yeah, I want to caveat all of these with this is just like very preliminary monitoring insights.
I won't hold you to putting it in the final paper.
Is that there's still, like, I would say a substantial segment or of around half of treated firms that very little transactions are coming through this channel, even after these interventions. And that's why in our minds, there's a very distinct separation in the processes of adopting a technology, and that's having it functional, not kind of under the drawer, completely not a part of the business. So there's a difference between having the technology adopted and functional in the business and driving significant usage of the technology. Both of these are really big problems to tackle, but it does suggest that there's a lot more going on than just getting the technology up and running in these businesses through various interventions.
Yeah. And then if I'm interpreting the data correctly, Shreya, there are increased sales by adopters. Some of that seems to, like I said, if I'm interpreting, some of that seems to be coming from more spending. The transactions themselves are larger as opposed to its marginal additional transactions. It's people are spending more in the transactions. Is that, am I understanding that right?
Yeah, and we're currently kind of trying to design survey instruments to disentangle where that is coming from. Is this expanded? Our main hunch is that this is an expanded liquidity sort of effect, where when a customer comes into the store but it only accepts cash, you're bound by the amount of cash in your wallet as opposed to like the entirety of your of your bank account. The other hunch is that this could be coming from accessing a new segment of customers now who only want to pay by cash. And for example, we found that there's a lot of that channel is likely to be playing out for businesses in tourist areas, or like very kind of areas frequented by that are common in the tourism industry.
So Pablo, let me turn to you. You're spending all of your days sort of thinking through these problems, the problems that micro merchants face. And you know, as Shreya is talking, I'm thinking about the adoption of cards from the very beginning. You know, this isn't a technology that's that old, you know, the 60s and 70s. But at the same time, you know, the pandemic notwithstanding, it, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, it was pretty frequent to walk around and find micro merchants who either in the United States who still didn't accept cards, you know, 40 years later, or were actively discouraging you from using the card. So there's a cash discount or some other, do you have to use a card to pay for that kind of, and you still see it often, I guess most often in gas stations, who there's a cash price versus a card price. And so, I mean, it would seem to me that there are these barriers, you know, that discourage a lot of micro merchants. When you started Kiwi to sort of address this problem, you know, what did you think the biggest barriers to adoption were going to be?
So what we've seen now from the beginning of Kiwi is some of the barriers are, first, how do the merchants manage their cash flow? No? They can receive a payment in credit card or in debit card, but at the end of the day, some of their costs are still in cash. No, if I take a beauty parlor, no? She would still have to pay for the other coiffeurs or the rest of the people in cash. No? So there is how do I manage my cash flow? Second is there's always the concern on what's the cost of this is going to have. No, how do I price in that X%, no, 3% with Kiwi, no, that is going to cost me to process this transaction. No? And some of them have turned into what you see in the States, where hey, there's a list price and there's a discount for when you're paying cash. No? More than that, there's others that have gone through which of these are my frequent customers, where I cannot transfer the cost, and which of them are not frequent customers. And sorry, if you want the service of payment through credit card, debit card, you have to pay for it. No, but there is certainly, how can I get this in a more efficient way? How can I reduce the cost of receiving cards? No? And the last one is, what's the implication of this towards my fiscal situation? No? Or I'm going to be having to pay taxes on any invoices that I get from these payments or not. No? So those are the three main features that we've seen that are present in their minds. Sorry, and I forgot one. At the end of the day, you need to receive this money in a bank account. No? So how do I get a bank account? No, it's not that difficult today in Mexico to get a bank account, but still it's an additional hurdle that you have to go through. And what we've seen is a lot of the merchants that have high usage have already have bank account. So if you see those with high adoption, it's generally because they already been used to the financial services industry.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of pick up on that point by Pablo. Initially, our technology intervention was exclusively focused on, the aspects that I described of giving them the technology and teaching them how to use it. But we realized a major hurdle was we were approaching many merchants in our sample who simply didn't have a bank account set up. And then it was essentially a very extended process of cajoling them, convincing them that this is something that they want to do. And so all these kind of financial inclusion aspects are very intricately linked, I feel. What we've done now in this project is we try to screen as much as possible that whatever firms entered the sample already have a bank account, because again, it's just a big hurdle to tackle ourselves. But we also include this option of setting up a online bank account quickly, and there's some kind of innovative banks in Mexico that allow that. But this is again another kind of trust education barrier that needs to be overcome. It's just like a first stage to transacting electronically.
So Pablo, I mean, you're talking about there are this group of merchants who were included already, if we measure inclusion by having a bank account, who were more likely to go along with it. Shreya mentioned, this aspect of the usage may be in some way, and size amounts of transactions may in some way related to, are you in tourist areas where there are a lot of wealthier people who are used to paying with cards? Do you feel like there is a specific geographical factor or other factors that are, say, more trust related, just in general lack of trust in systems that need to be overcome, that have been a barrier for the firms that you work with?
So it's a good example. No, I was talking to a customer just a couple of weeks back, no, and she has this clothing store in the middle of, let's say, a small town, not the place where you would see a lot of where you'd expect to see a lot of transactions, no. And talking to her, no, she was very outgoing, no, and so given the pandemic, she started advertising in Facebook, no, she started doing chats and in WhatsApp to connect with new customers, etc. No? But still, when we analyze her transactions, it was very small, no? And what was happening with her? No? Do you have the marketing tools? Yes, she has. You're going out to pursue new customers? Yes, she's. At the end of the day, are there cards there or not? No, you cannot break the chicken and egg just by putting the capacity out there. No, so definitely there is. Sorry, and something that she mentioned a lot is, no, we have the service of payment by distance. No, you send a link and you can pay. My customers don't trust that. No, it's something new. No, so it's not enough to have the cards. It's not enough to have the terminals and the payment solutions. You have to focus on the areas where the both are available. No, and that's where you start to see a lot of transaction that starts with payments and then can go to accounts having money, and from there you can plug in additional services that are beneficial to this merchant.
So one of the things I think a lot about in this segment, and I'll say, I'm fascinated by these small firms. At FAI, we've, with MasterCard's help, started a project called the Small Firm Diaries, where we're going to be doing financial diaries of firms between 2 and 20 employees in 7 countries, not including Mexico, but 7 countries around the world. And how they think about risks and opportunities is one of the things that I'm really very interested in. And particularly here, so there's a story that can go both ways so often. So one is digital record keeping can be potentially very, very positive for these firms. And we have some evidence that just very simple record keeping can make a big difference in terms of the profitability of firms, helping them keep track with digital services. I'm hoping to do a project similar to this in Uganda, looking at that specifically. But at the same time, there's a concern about, well, if I keep digital records, who's going to get access to those? That some firms may actively not want to keep digital records. And there's a gender lens. Some women, particularly where they don't feel like they have full control over the resources, might not want to have a trail of data that could sort of amplify questions of their ability to control. There's long been an argument for digital financial services of the security argument. The security argument being carrying around, having a lot of cash is dangerous in a lot of places. At the same time, there's this sort of unknown sort of digital, well, maybe there are all those hackers out there that if it's digital will steal my money in some way that I don't understand and I can't protect myself. At least, in cash, I know how to identify a dangerous situation, digital. So Both Pablo and Shreya, how have you seen sort of people interacting with these? There's a push-pull. There's an advantage here of keeping digital records. There's a disadvantage of maybe the formality, taxes, or other reasons for record keeping. There's an advantage here of security. I don't have to worry about being robbed of my cash. Oh, but there are all these security risks that I don't understand. Shreya, have you seen some of that play out as people sort of think about adoption and how much they're pushing through these channels?
Yeah, there's sort of a number of points that I would want to make here. So first of all, in terms of like the advantages of just simple product record keeping, we've done work on that, and I have a working paper that I'll circulate with this audience, where we intervened to get retail merchants in Mexico City to start tracking their daily sales at the product level. And our intervention, we estimated the fact that 2 years out, there was a 18% improvement in revenue and profitability. And so it plays out even over a very long horizon. The essential channel that we saw it working through and provide evidence on this is that they were really able to understand which of their products sell more and less, and therefore gear and target their assortment, product marketing efforts around those products. So there seems to be a lot of potential advantages to it. Yet I totally agree with you, and we have seen this completely on field, that the idea of doing this, having this digital record or trail, is very frightening. There's a published paper in Marketing Science by Talukdar and Sudhir, where they show that actually retail firms in India are significantly less likely to adopt information technology when they're in regions that are known for higher corruption of the tax authorities, and that this hinders their profitability. In the context of this particular study, we've seen it's actually interesting, because I think in the minds of merchants, these things are all very nebulous and scary, and there's a lot of misinformation around. So there was, I think about like prior to COVID, late 2019, there was an update to the tax code that was actually kind of completely irrelevant to any of this space of digital payments for merchants. And it proved to be a huge challenge for our recruitment, because suddenly every time we were trying to enroll firms in this study, they were like, oh, well, I heard about something's changing with taxes, and I'm afraid. I just don't want to get involved with this anymore. And we actually had to bring in like a tax professor to give a webinar to our recruiters so they could like address this particular misinformation and say, well, this has nothing to do with you, don't be worried. But in the minds of merchants, it all seems to be tangled up together and just frightening. So it is definitely a challenge. And I'm curious as to how kind of Pablo has encountered this in his work, and like, I guess the methods that they have in place to deal with these concerns.
Sure, and a couple of reactions there. No, is in terms of digital bookkeeping. No, that's one of the features that we have in the app. No? But just designing this to be simpler than going down to to juggle a note in your notebook is not easy. No, so there's a first technological design. Then how do you make it easier, and how do you not lose customers because they're stuck with a pop-up in the app? No, but and I think we've made some progress there. There's still work to be done. No? And when you talk about registering their sales in the app, no, two questions come up. Is, hey, are you going to charge a commission for that? No, we're not. This is a service for you. And second is the tax authority going to have access to those records? No? Am I going to have to pay taxes for that? No? And that's a huge concern. No? That's something that they might be willing to stomach if I know that I might have to pay taxes on a small percentage of my transactions, which is the card side of it. But if it's the whole of it, then there's a lot of resistance when you get there. No, and the other topic that I want to touch upon was what we've seen that works very well or not that works, but where you can overcome some of those fears and issues, it's just recommendation. No? How do they hear from other merchants, hey, I've done this, I'm doing this. No? So the voice of peers is very, very powerful to get them through some of those hurdles. No?
Mm-hmm.
We've had some good results in that respect, and having groups of them talking, without our intervention. It's, hey, there's a group for merchants, you can exchange here what issues you have, what solutions you've encountered, and that has been very powerful to having them build or trusting more in the platform and the services that we deliver.
Yeah, and that's very consistent with a lot of other technology adoption research of how much social networks matter, that they know someone who they identify as like them who has adopted the technology, and how that spreads. Paulo, another sort of one of the big questions, of course, when we come to micro merchants is, they do need some handholding, more so potentially than larger merchants and people with more experience. But that always raises the question, why invest in helping these micro merchants? You've started a company specifically to sort of address this market. So, from your perspective, why is it worth investing in these merchants?
We do believe that in an economy as the Mexican economy, if you are going to get some real development behind the economy and the country, you need these micro merchants to start development, to give them the tools to unlock their potential. And that's where our passion comes from. If we can really put our grain of salt or grain of sand to help the country develop economically, it has to come from these micro merchants. And we do as well think that the technology is there, and Shreya showed some numbers, which are completely consistent with what we see. 80-something% of them already have access to a phone, to internet. So the infrastructure starts to be there. The complicated side of it is, how do you make services that are easy enough, that are so intuitive that you don't need that much hand holding to really make it at scale, and that's where the interesting challenge comes from. And we've been working a lot on getting, we call it the love by process, but really understanding when a customer gets stuck in some point in the funnel, in the process, and then acting upon that. There's no way we'll be able to include 7 million micro merchants that there is in Mexico if we have to go and visit them one by one, door by door. We have to come up with a way to make this scalable, right? And that's where we're focusing on.
So Shreya, I'm going to give the last word to you, following up right on that on Pablo before we wrap up. What is, given all of the work that you've done, not just in this study, but studying these things, what is your sense of something of a tipping point where we're just talking about the network effects and the demand effects and the supply effects? At some point, it does seem like there are enough people adopting that adopting for everyone else becomes much easier. That you don't have to do quite so much handholding because they can just ask the person next door who's also using the technology, or so many customers are demanding this. Do you think we're close to some tipping points in a place like Mexico and other places you've studied that the momentum is there for the adoption of DFS and that can be accelerated a little bit towards that end goal?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question that we still don't have an answer to, of like, if you seat the device in sort of one business, what is going to be the kind of spillover impact 6 months out or so on? And that's something that we're actively trying to measure here, because we intend to go back to all the neighbors of these merchants and collect of the merchant that we seeded the technology with. The great thing about this study is we're going to have experimental variation there. So there will be a business that received the technology, a business that isn't, and then we can compare the neighbors of those firms. I'm hopeful because it could happen through a variety of channels. Like, there's like the neighboring merchant is my friend, so I talk to him, I learn about these trust issues and so on. B, the neighboring merchant is my competitor, and therefore I need to do whatever he or she is doing to still be relevant. C, because my neighboring merchant introduced this technology in their business, more customers in the neighborhood have started to adopt digital payment methods. And now, although my neighbor was a hairdresser and I'm a restaurant, when they come to me now, they want to pay through this alternative method. So there's a lot of kind of channels that this could work through. And I also wanted to kind of touch a bit on the point Pablo was making about why this segment is still so important to national economic growth. I think something like 60% of retail sales in Mexico is coming through this segment of micro merchants. And people ask me often when I'm presenting this research, is Walmart going to come in and just kind of wipe out this segment? Is you know, whichever international, multinational corporation it is. And I think there are lots of reasons why that won't be the case, from like infrastructure constraints to shopper constraints to kind of regulatory constraints. And, you know, the government wants to create kind of good jobs for a wide segment of people. I think the segment is going to be there for the foreseeable future, at least in Mexico, definitely in other places like India and so on, where you also haven't seen kind of modern retailers coming out and wiping this segment out. And as a result, we do need to really focus a lot of our research on getting these types of businesses to understand the value that digitization might bring to them and push them further along in their digital journey. And kind of companies like Kiwi are sort of an very important part of that ecosystem of digitizing this segment, as Pablo mentioned, at scale.
Yeah, as Pablo was saying, it takes a lot of work to take something, make it easier to do on a phone than it is to just write it down in a notebook. And you know, that kind of approach for a significant part of the population. Well,
but to answer your question precisely, I think there's still kind of a long way to go, and you know, our future work is going to directly address and intervene on some of these trust barriers that exist.
And certainly we'll be interested on the spillover side of things. I know from Sean Higgins' work on the Prospera expansion that, you know, spillovers, you know, were a big part of that. That, you know, the more people using cards led to more people using cards, and you know, ultimately benefited the merchants too by bringing in new customers. So we are sort of pushing up against our time. Shreya and Pablo, thank you so much for engaging. As I've learned a lot in the conversation. And hopefully others listening have as well. As Shreya mentioned, there are going to be some resources available if you want to follow up on some of the details of her study and some of these other this other related work. But on that note, Felipe, otra vez a ti.
Thank you very much. Muy interesante la conversación. Claro que nos podríamos seguir más tiempo, ¿no? Aquí ya nos decía Timothy, estamos sobre el tiempo, pero yo creo que todos nos hubiéramos querido quedar un rato más escuchando estos interesantes hallazgos. Les agradezco mucho a Shreya, a Timothy y a Pablo su tiempo, el compartirnos sus conocimientos, sus resultados, muy relevantes y muy interesantes. Ojalá tengamos la oportunidad de darles continuidad, de también continuar con estas implementaciones, estas investigaciones que han realizado, para que podamos ver en una fase 2, ¿no? en una segunda etapa, a ver qué más se ha podido avanzar. Y pues obviamente esto sin duda también buscando el beneficio de los usuarios de estos servicios, los microempresarios y sus propios clientes también de las comunidades a las que pertenecen. Y pues sin más, no me queda más que agradecer a todos los asistentes a este webinar. Estoy seguro de que fue de su total interés y que fue muy interesante y muy provechoso para todos ustedes. Y próximamente también en nuestro sitio web estaremos compartiendo material relacionado con esta charla para que la puedan tener más a la mano, la puedan descargar y analizar. Y naturalmente, próximamente también los estaremos invitando a próximos webinars que estaremos organizando gracias al FAIR Center y al Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth. En nombre del FAIR Center y del Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth, les agradecemos a todos su participación y nos seguiremos viendo en próximos webinars. Muchas gracias.